Hey, this is Big Tony of the legendary Trouble Funk. In this upcoming election, we need to speak truth to power. We need a steady hand to guide us through this rough ride called COVID-19. We need to educate our kids and keep them safe. Stop the killings by adding jobs and opportunities. I'm Big Tony, and I urge you to vote Vincent Orange for City Council at large. He gets it done.
I'm Vincent Orange, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Vincent Orange 2020. Paul Wesley Orange, Treasurer.
You know, it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to have the Mayor for Life book right here in front of me. And what's amazing just about the cover is that Mayor for Life is in orange. And right in the background, that was my office. He would always say, VO, you got my back. And for him to have on the cover of his page, my office in the back that's kind of glowing in orange is extremely gratifying and an honor for me. On July 14th, when he autographed his book to me, it was amazing that the words are still relevant and powerful today. And he said to me, to Vincent Orange, a good alpha brother, the citizens of Washington are blessed to have your leadership. You are a fighter for the working class people. You have great courage in fighting for Black people. Marion Barry, July 14, 2014. And then he passed in November of 2014. So I always go back to remember what he was saying. Vincent Orange, you have leadership for Washington, D.C. You are a fighter for the working class, and you have courage in standing up for Black people. And that will always be with me for the rest of my life, and I will always work to accomplish the three things that he indicated in his book. Good evening, Facebook friends. My name is Vincent Orange. I am an at-large candidate for the Council of the District of Columbia. We're very pleased to have you with us tonight as we discuss a very important issue. That is an issue regarding the District of Columbia incarcerated residents and the District of Columbia returning citizens. Many of you may know that there are over 4,500 DC incarcerated residents in federal institutions across the United States. There are 122 felony institutions where these prisoners are actually being housed. In the District of Columbia, there are 1,375 persons in the DC correctional facilities. And for the first time, all these persons will be able to vote in this very important election that's going to take place on Tuesday, November 3rd of 2020. And so tonight, we're looking to have a very lively discussion about the opportunity for our DC incarcerated residents to vote. We understand that the DC Board of Election has sent out registration materials to these 122 federal institutions, but we are unaware as to whether or not those inmates have actually received those documents and that they have had an opportunity to fill out the documents and send them back. The reason why we're having this urgent Facebook Live dialogue tonight is because the deadline to register is next week on October 13th. So that's only 4 days from now. And we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to cast their vote. But the first step is to make sure that we get our DC incarcerated residents in the federal system and the local system to actually be registered and receive their ballots. Joining me tonight for this discussion are two returning citizens that are very involved in incarcerated inmates' life. We have with us tonight Carnell Jones and Roach Brown. Gentlemen, welcome to this discussion here tonight.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Mr. Jones, welcome to Facebook Live. And you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the discussion?
Well, I'm DC, lifelong DC resident, been involved in the community advocacy for the last 20, 25 years, and returning citizens is my number one priority to give them a second chance when they do return back to the community. So this is an issue that I'm very concerned about, especially in this voting year when they pass the bill to vote. They should be able to allow them to vote. And that's not happening unless somebody pushes. I'm glad to have you as the leader in pushing this issue at this critical time because the time is running out. And we need to do something to get these votes in so they can be counted like the law passed said they should.
Okay, well, thank you. Mr. Brown, are you with us?
Brother Brown. He might be like me. I mean, we old guys, so we don't know much about all this technology that you can do now. So that's probably he's getting himself together. Maybe. He's there?
Yeah, you're there. Go ahead, Mr. Brown. How are you? And welcome to Facebook Live.
We just got a few technical problems, but we're here.
Okay, so Mr. Brown, Colonel Jones was talking a little bit about himself. We want to give you an opportunity to present yourself to the viewing audience.
Say that again. I'm having trouble hearing you.
Go ahead and introduce yourself to the viewing audience.
Introduce myself. Well, let me say this. My name is Roach Brown, a native Washingtonian. I spent about 30 years and 4 months in prison. Half of my life has been spent on installment plan in various institutions. I write plays, movies, TV shows. I was able to get a presidential commentation based on the work we did with a group called the Inner Voices. And since then, we've been working in the community with various issues affecting or benefiting returning citizens. We created the Office of Ex-Offender Affairs, which is now called MORCA, the Mayor's Office of Returning Citizens. And we created that office about 25 years ago. So it feels good to know that we've been participating and helping making things a little brighter for some of us, man, who have a rough go of it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Jones and Mr. Brown, for the first time in the history of the District of Columbia, our incarcerated residents will have the opportunity to vote. But there's a major problem. We're not sure that they have received their registration materials, and the deadline is October 13th in order to get those voter registration cards in. Do you have any knowledge as to what's going on in both our local system and the federal system where our inmates are incarcerated in 122 institutions across this country?
Great, Cornell. You want to start it?
Yeah, well, as Councilman said there, the time is running out, and we definitely need to see if we can maybe even have them go to the council and ask them to extend the time 5 days or so to give the Bureau of Prisons a chance to fulfill the obligation that they was asked to do. I mean, we have to do something because like the time is definitely running out, and today is the 9th, so you're talking about the 13th, which is after the weekend. That's Monday or Tuesday, I believe. Yeah, that's Tuesday. And I think that we need to ask someone on the council to step up, or Congressman Norton, which because being that it is the BOP, but still have to come back down to the local legislation to do that.
Yeah.
As the chairman for emergency vote on it.
Well, Mr. Brown, I know you've been in contact with Congresswoman Eleanor Norton's office on this issue. What have you been able to learn as it relates to registration?
We haven't been able to learn that much, except that they made commitments that they would follow the DC government's recommendations. But as usual, the Bureau of Prisons has been reluctant or stingy, or however you want to describe it, in providing assistance and making things move will happen, man, because they are just That's the BOP, and we need, as Cornell said, we need for you, Brother Vincent, to call the council member and make sure, and the mayor, and I'm saying that the urgency, because the BOP is supposed to be distributing these ballots under the directions or the authorization of the DC Board of Elections. And we don't know how they've been dispersed. If it's consistent with the way the BOP has normally been operating, it's a joke, man. It's a joke. So we need pressure. A call from you, a call from us, a call from anybody to the mayor and city council, because those inmates in the Bureau of Prisons are DC residents, and they have the right to vote. And we have to make sure that our elected officials have to make sure they get a fair opportunity to participate.
Well, it's my understanding that the DC Board of Elections Executive Director, Alice Miller, by the end of September, she has sent out over 2,000 ballots to more than 100 federal institutions. Now, for her to have sent out those 2,000 ballots already, that means at least 2,000 inmates have in fact been registered, or she would have been unable to send them a ballot. So now we need to ascertain what's happening with the other 2,500 who have not received a ballot, which would suggest that they have not been registered.
You know, there's a way we can.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I can wait.
no, and well, the BOP is, and if you say mention plantation, you can put that on the BOP, because that's exactly what it is. They really don't care about voting or anything else. Their job is to keep them brothers and sisters who thousands of miles away from home under lockdown, because all federal prison as of today for the last 90 days has been under lockdown. So, and the only thing they have is the telephone, which they have to pay for, and they can't pay for it because they're not out on the job that would normally let them make a little stipend while they're in. So, I think that the mayor, the council chairman, or somebody should step up to the plate and show how much they care about their citizens. And they should be here if they had time. I mean, they asked to be a state, and you can't be a state if you don't manage your own prisoners. That's number one. And and if we don't get that done, and Brother Orange, I know we had discussed it, and I know you are all in favor for bringing them brothers and sisters back home close to keep the family ties that needed to be kept, because they're all going to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to move to that discussion in a second. But Mr. Brown, it appears that you want to weigh in. You had something to say?
No, I think he covered it. Basically, all I wanted to say is, man, that we need to have, I like to suggest that if we got less than 4 days, for those folks who are listening, who got a loved one, a relative, or a family, somebody inside one of them institutions, vote on their behalf. Vote, make sure your neighbors, your relatives, your siblings, your family, y'all vote out here. Everybody vote. And while time is running out for them brothers and sisters inside, it's not running out for you. You can vote. We need every vote. We need the families of those incarcerated to vote to make sure we can make a difference and the impact. So the families, the friends, brothers, sisters, grandmothers, neighbors, y'all vote. We need everybody's vote.
Well, thank you very much, Mr.
Yes,
Brown.
I would agree with that.
And you know, as you know, we've been raising the pressure all week long. This past Saturday, I had the opportunity to appear on Cornell Jones's show, where we talked about this for a good hour. And then on this past Tuesday, I appeared on Mr. Roach Brown's show, and we had a good hour, a good discussion, a lot of questions, a lot of feedback, and that's when we decided, that we would have this Facebook Live so we can really keep this issue in the forefront. Calls have been made to our Congresswoman's office. Calls have been made to the mayor's office. Calls have been made to the council. And so we just want to keep the pressure on and keep the word out that the deadline is fastly approaching. The deadline is October 13th. And so the viewing audience, if you have someone that is incarcerated, please make contact with them and see how you can assist them in getting registered by October 13th. I guess the good news is that we do know at least 2,000 of the 4,500 in the federal system have actually been mailed ballots. And 1,375 in the DC local system have in fact received voter registration material as well. Mr. Brown and Mr. Rose, can we move to the subject of compassionate release due to COVID-19? I see that Donald J. Trump, the president of the United States, top two people, Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, have been released pursuant to compassionate release, and they're able to convalesce at home due to COVID-19. Mr. Brown, tell us a little bit about this compassionate release that came about.
Compassionate release has always been on the books for like 30, 40 years. It hasn't been widely used, but in very rare selected cases. But because of the coronavirus, more publicity has been put on it. Folks realize that's an option that men and women can use to come out of prison. And the Attorney General sent a memorandum out asking the BOP to expedite and speed up the process of granting compassionate release for particularly those folks who are old, elderly, infirm, disabled, and etc., who's not a threat back to society. But what happened was that was in March. Then the Attorney General submitted another letter asking the BOP to step up their process. As of today's date, since March until now, the BOP has granted compassionate release to less than 2,000 folk, man. And there's cases of women or people who file motions asking for a compassionate release, and they die within when the judge denied them. There's been cases on record documented that many women requested that, and they died, and they met all the criteria that for a compassionate release. And even if they didn't meet the criteria, man, your house is on fire. You know what I mean? The fire trucks is dead, and they tell you to stay in that room until I come back for you. You ain't gonna be there when they come back. It's on fire.
Right. And Mr. Jones, are you aware of anyone that's any DC incarcerated resident or anyone in our local jails that have been released pursuant to this compassionate release authority that exists?
Well, you know, I have to admit I have, and it's been a few, and this came and like Roach said, it's been on the book. Compassionate release been on the book for decades, but under the First Step Act. And we got to give Brother Trump some credit for that, because what that did, it took it out of the court's hand, and it's up to the BOP can approve your compassionate release. Now that's where the holdup is, because they're not used to releasing people unless it's under the direction of some type of court control. But now they have control, and it took them probably at least 10 months or to a year to even get it started. And then this COVID hit the first of the year. That's when Attorney General Barr and ordered the BOP to start moving along much faster, releasing these individuals. And they've been on the book, and there's a lot of other ways you can get out also now. And what they did on the First Step Act, most of the authority of early release is in the BOP, Federal Bureau of Prison, purvey. And that's where the problem lies, because now you have to go through your caseworker, then you got to go through your unit manager, then you have to go through your captain, then you have to go through the associate warden, then you have to go to the warden to do the final signage.
Yes.
And before the warden signage, he sends a letter to the court and see if the prosecutor who prosecutes you have any objections. And that's where so many steps you have to get through before you actually can get that release. And under the First Step Act, also, if you 60 years or over, you don't have to do the 85% mandatory sentence anymore. Now you only have to do 2/3 of that sentence. So, and they can put you on home confinement. And when you release, you're not released. You're still doing your time. You're just doing it at home with some type of monitoring on your leg or a phone or whatever. But you still, so some of these guys coming out, they have 8 years with a home confinement. Because so they're not actually cutting you loose. They actually sending you home so you can monitor yourself, and so that's what it's about.
I want to ask something to what Conan said. Your question was about this compassionate release. The bottom line is that Title 18, Section 4082 of the Federal Prison Criminal Code states that the Attorney General has the authority to extend the limits of confinement, which means technically you have to be inside a prison. But in order for them to extend the limits of confinement, compassionate release is one of them conditions, emergency situations, educational opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. This stuff, these release mechanisms have been on the book, but they've been very seldom used except in the two cases of Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. Because of their relationship or connection to President Trump, they received preferential treatment to get out. And I was told by somebody who was in the joint with Manafort when he got released, Manafort was the push-up champion in his dormitory. He was beating everybody to 2 to 3 push-ups. Afraid of this man catching the coronavirus and his health is fragile. He's the push-up champion in the prison.
Wow, well, it certainly doesn't appear that when he's in public, because whenever he's in public, he appears to be frail and weak and need help and all that. But I'm sure his home confinement, just like Michael Cohen and Roger Stone, they have a very good place to be confined at. And unlike our incarcerated residents, even when they are released pursuant to compassionate release, then they also have more problems like, the home environment, how they're able to assimilate back into their environment with their families and what have you. So that there's another host of problems that come along with that release. And Mr. Brown, you were telling me there's about 3,000 people that actually have COVID throughout the system. And what was your number? About 1,149 have actually died?
It's 131,000 men and women in the prison system with COVID-19. There's 1,100 that died. 1,100 inmates that died so far in federal and state institutions combined from the COVID-19. But it's 131,000 nationwide in federal and state who've been infected with the virus.
Well, that's amazing.
Well, it's definitely a pandemic. And
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it is a pandemic. You just the closest federal prison here to D.C., you have almost 30% of probably 2,000 inmates have COVID. They have one institution. And I know the median. The minimum. They had 270 something inmates there, and I know 65% of them have been positive for COVID.
Wow!
And matter of fact, it was in the papers here about a month ago, and all they did with them is move them out and move them right back where they came from.
Wow. Okay, well, that is extremely unfortunate. Now, let's move on to another subject that has a problem, and that's basically separation by bars and miles. Back in 1997, there was a transfer of all DC incarcerated residents to the BOP, to the Bureau of Prisons. and that meant that all DC incarcerated residents were sent to one of the 122 federal institutions across this United States. And the research has shown that this has become a major problem, separation by bars and miles, and has really turned out to be unusual and cruel punishment because our inmates are separated from their families, and some of them are sent as far as California and other places on the West Coast and have actually lost ties with their family. And even when they have the opportunity to go and visit, it may cost them $2,000 to get a round trip ticket. Then they have to get a hotel. They have to have food. And so that has been a major problem. And finally, I read an article where one gentleman had 11-year sentence and also had a young daughter at 1 year old that he has been unable to visit or see. And when he's finally released from prison, this 10-year-old, 11-year-old is going to be looking like, who is this? And so he's had really separation from his family. Mr. Brown, you want to talk about the separation by bars and miles?
We just did a show a couple of months ago of children of incarcerated parents. And we had 2 young girls who were 10 and 11 years old whose father had been locked up since just before they was born, and they told about the problems of this incarceration. And we talk about all these studies that Yale and Harvard and these big sociologists are doing about the effects of separation from their parent. Man, that's just common sense. You take a kid from his mother, I don't care if it's a turtle, frog, elephant, or bulldog. You separate a kid from his parent, then you impact it or affecting that kid for the rest of their life, man. You don't need no study to find out what kind of damage that kid's going to suffer because they get separated from their mother. That is a big issue inside of the prison system. You're sent to prison to be punished, not your family. And because of the way prisons are, the way they treat us, they treat our families and our kids the same way. Connection with your family, communication with the community is vital, is necessary. That's just common sense, man. And they pay these jokers $300,000-$400,000 to do these studies. You just take grasshopper away from a mother grasshopper, and you see how they act.
So, Mr. Jones, here we have again, your families are being separated. One is doing their time, but on top of doing their time, in many cases, because of where they're located, they're being separated from their families. Would you like to comment on that, Mr. Jones?
Yeah, well, I mean, the BOP is the only thing we have. I mean, and of course you had the private prison system, but I mean, them brothers and sisters need to be incarcerated right here in their community, like every other community across the country. And the breakup of the family is already there when you take your loved one away. But when you build support if you close by and you have your family members that your daughters, your sons, and believe it or not, that's when some of them brothers' heads are clear and they can get the bond when they're with their children. They can talk to the children. They can tell them right and wrong. So it's once some brothers in there and their head is straight and they done got some that BOP medicine in them. I mean, what I mean by that is the treatment. A lot of them begin to see the light, that this is not the life they want. Some of these guys are first-time offenders. So I think that that the city, I mean, this is one of the wealthiest cities in the country, and they need to think about bringing them brothers and sisters back here. And when they took that away, they took a lot of jobs away because now the BOP is paying to have top dollar to house our prisoners, and that money could be spent right here in our community with more jobs and more family ties that's being built.
Correct.
Of course.
Now, prior to this, our DC incarcerated residents were housed at the Lorton Reformatory in Fairfax County. And when the city ran into financial trouble in the 1997-1998, and the late Alice Rivlin was over the control board, they were able to strike a deal with the federal government where the federal government would take over the prison system and the incarceration of DC residents for felonies. And it's called the Revitalization Act. So that paved the way for the closing of Lorton in the end of 2001. But even Alice Rivlin at that time said, this transfer took a good load off of the DC's budget, but she acknowledged that there will be downsides. And I quote, "It has also had some downsides because if you're incarcerated in a federal prison, you might be in Idaho and your family can't visit you and you lose your connection with your community." And she goes on to say there's a lot of downsides to not having prisoners close by. Now, I understand that they have a facility called Rivers that is about 210 miles. It's located in Winton, North Carolina, where a large number of DC incarcerated persons are there. But I also know of cases where our inmates are being sent to California. They've been sent to Idaho, up in Pennsylvania, and it's been a hardship on those families to maintain contact with their loved ones. Mr. Brown, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult to maintain contact. Something I wanted to add on the last question you just asked about the problem our women, our families going to visit, and how far away and the hardship it imposes. Something that we have been discussing, need to be discussed, that our women and families are insulted, they're disrespected. The guards put their hands on them, they run them on their breasts between their legs and all this kind of stuff. I'm the one that was convicted in the sentence, not them. When they use under the banner or the color of security and they insult, violate, and threaten our women and kids and put their hands on them and search them, man. This is part of that problem. You say they got to ride 3,000-4,000 miles away to see somebody. And they're abusing our ladies, and we're being abused, and they put up with it because they figure that they'll retaliate against them and us, and they do. But still, stand up for your rights, ladies, human beings. You're a human being. There's nobody. I broke the law, not you. They shouldn't put their hands all up and down your body and tell you for security reasons. They got other ways to deal with that problem, and it's not to be insulted or disrespected.
So, Mr. Jones, in these cases, it's a double whammy, more or less. You're there doing your time, but also you find yourself being separated from your family. You're not able to really be involved in the development and the training of your children. And all of a sudden, you've been away for 10 years, 15 years. You return home and you're a stranger because the District of Columbia is a territory, and unlike the other states, they all house their populations that are there to be incarcerated. But here in the District of Columbia, because of the financial crisis of 1997, 98, 2000, we now find that our incarcerated personnel our incarcerated residents are located all across the United States, as opposed to at least being within a 250-mile radius that doesn't place an extreme burden on the families and the loved ones. And so, as you know, I've basically come to the conclusion that this is cruel and unusual punishment, that our DC incarcerated residents are not being incarcerated with dignity, and now they're also being separated from their families. So how do we get around this?
Well, I mean, being in the system myself, DC residents are stigmatized. They are, the BOP have a reputation of treating DC inmates a lot different than anybody else that's in the system. Because you got in every institution, the 100-something institution, you have someone from DC in there. And it's a shame because they were moved out of the area because of financial oversight, like I said, with Mr. Gribbling and the control board back in the day. But now the city is fiscal secure. I mean, they're having over 600 or more new high dollar paying residents moving to the city every day. I mean, every month. So, well, not 600 every month. So you're talking about at least 7,200 every year for the last, I would say, 8 years, if not 10. And they are coming for these high dollar salaries. So the money is there to bring our brothers and sisters back home. I mean, you know, you have, they were talking about over in Blue Plains for years. There's plenty of land over there to bring 3,000 individuals back to this city. So you wouldn't have to go that 250 miles. And then when you get them, you jam them in there with, some of these prisons around here up in West Virginia, up in these mountains, and down in North Carolina and South Carolina, all the way down to Florida. DC prisoners are not treated the same. We are stigmatized, all over the system. And the first thing they ask you, where you from? And they look at you funny if you say you're from DC. I mean, DC prison has been used in the BOP for ages. I remember when the Federal Bureau of Prison was 90% white. And what they did, they bust DC prisoners all around the country to desegregate these prisons. I mean, like Atlanta Penitentiary, that was all white one time. But they took 2-3 busloads of DC prisoners in there, and that's how they actually I'm trying to say, integrated racially some of these prisons. So, you in Kentucky, you in West Virginia, you in Oklahoma, you in Texas. I mean, you all over. And all these prisons are run by 80 to 90% white staff.
So, Mr. Brown, everyone is saying that the solution to this is for the District of Columbia to build its own facility. And we also, a lot of us believe, and such as I, that we have a great chance to flip the Senate. The House of Representatives have gone on record in support of DC statehood. And if we're able to flip a few seats, we will have the Senate. And both our presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, and the vice president nominee, Kamala Harris, are both on record for DC statehood. So now, is it the time for our elected officials in the District of Columbia to start preparing for DC statehood? And with that, when we become a state, we certainly will have the obligation to house our DC incarcerated residents. So is now the time to start preparing for that and start talking about building a DC facility in the jurisdiction?
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And I'll tie that into your last question about the politics of Lawton. When they took the 1997 Revitalization Act and they transferred control from over to the feds, in 1971, Representative Joel B. Broadhill, a congressman from Virginia, he wanted the land, and it was in the Washington Post, how they said that was valuable real estate. So for the next 20 or 30 years, they've been trying to take over Lawton, and one of the reasons they used was the financial mismanagement in Washington, D.C. to give them justification for taking over Lawton. That's over here. The other piece is all our prisoners, Vince, from D.C. should, according to the 97 Revitalization Act, supposed to receive the same benefits, programs, and projects that they were receiving in Lawton Reformatory. But the minute they go to the feds, they lose that. We used to have a family day where families come and spend all day long. We had the furlough program. It was a more liberal program going on, so our men were able to stay connected to the community. And we need statehood, and we got to vote. And the bottom line to that is we have over 60 to 70,000 folk in Washington, D.C. with criminal records. And everybody has at least one, or say they got two people, average of two. Some with more, some with less. So if we got 60,000 folk in the community right now, we're looking at 120 or 240,000 folk that can vote. So we got to get them people on board to vote. If we can flip the Senate and we get our big population, not only returning citizens, but families, wives, girlfriends, brothers, sisters, cousins, get the puppy in there. Everybody need to vote and make sure we can do what we're trying to do, man, to bring our people closer home and we can get our people out quicker and sooner.
Yes, so at the end of the day, if you want to be a state, you must act like a state. And in the words of Alice Rivlin, once again, she indicated that incarceration of convicted felons, normally that's a state function. Cities run jails, but they're not responsible for long-term incarceration of convicts. And so we have 4,500 long-term incarcerated convicts in the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons. And therefore, if we're on the verge of becoming a state, there needs to be active planning for building a facility either in the District of Columbia or close by, where we can incarcerate our residents with dignity, but also give them an opportunity to be a part of their family. And for, if you have young children, for the young children to still be a part of your life. Because it indicates that when you take the incarcerated prisoners out of family life, there is a positive chance of reentry and recidivism, and that's something that we do not want. And we want to make sure that a lot of these children have some direction in life. And generally, when one is incarcerated, I believe, as Mr. Cornell Jones has indicated, they find out this is not the life that they want, and clearly this is not the life that they want for their children, but they need to be involved in their children's lives in order to have a positive impact. Before we move on to another issue, I'd like to give both you, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Jones, another opportunity, if you like, to talk about this subject matter before we move on to another.
And what's the subject matter? I forgot.
Well, right now it's just building our own jails, bringing our inmates closer to home. And if we've exhausted that subject matter, I have another subject matter that we can go to.
All right.
All right.
Cornell,
okay, so
You move, yeah. Well, I think we covered that. I mean, the main thing is bringing our prisoners home. I mean, you want to, and like I say, it's not going to be considered. You can't be a state if you don't handle your own incarcerated. I mean, it's different if you're Puerto Rico, and they even have their own prisons. So the overflow they do send here to America if they're in the federal system. But if they're not in the federal system, they all stay in Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right.
I mean, so even Guam, the other territories.
One of the advantages about Lawton, people from around the country they heard about Lawton and they wanted to be transferred to Lawton to see if it was a possibility. Guys were going to college. They were running community-based programs in the community. Guys got scholarships to go to college while in Lawton serving time. On any given day, several hundred men were out of Lawton on furlough, participating in colleges, working with handicapped kids, senior citizens, etc. So it was like at the beginning of the prison rights movement. So and it was family days. So the family was intricately involved in men went inside, and that helped reduce the recidivism rate. It helped put families together. It reduced domestic violence. At the same time, it gave these men a purpose. So we need our institutions, because we can put each state put their own personality or stamp on what kinds of programs this can run for their sentence population. And DC had one of the most advanced, progressive programs for men and women inside of it, on the inside, than any institution in the country. So when he took that away from us under the guise of mismanagement of funds and all that other GOP, it took away a lot of these. And so again, I'm suggesting to you, Councilman Vince, that again, the Revitalization Act of '97 says that the inmates in DC are being transferred there just to be housed in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But they still supposed to enjoy the same kinds of programming, rehabilitative programs that they were receiving in Lawton. That's non-existent. The BOP has ignored, disregarded how they're supposed to treat DC prisoners. So again, we need to be closer at our families. As Cornell said, 90% of all these institutions, man, the staff is 80 to 90% white. And 80% of the majority of the prison population is black. There's a direct correlation, man, of conflict just in our cultures. And they put us all over the country. You know what I mean? Go ahead. I had enough.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, I know this is a subject matter that many have talked about, and that is in the DC code, DC inmates seeking executive clemency have to submit the application to the president by way of the United States Department of Justice. There are many folks that believe that legislation ought to be introduced to provide executive clemency authority to the mayor, that is for pardons and commuting of sentences. Mr. Brown, why don't you elaborate on this subject matter?
When Myron Barry came out of institution in the 90s, and we helped him work on this campaign, one of the issues that he put on his platform was giving the mayor the authority to grant executive clemencies and pardons. He also had conjugal visits on there. He also had hiring inmates, guards, or correctional staff. He also wanted returning citizens to be on the DC Board of Parole, which he appointed to. So this kind of thing is necessary and vital, man. And you are in the same mode right now, Vince. I support you. I recommend that what you're doing lights my fire. Guys are aware of what you're trying to. Basically, what we're talking about is treating people as human beings. And that's what you've been able to do. That's what your platform is about. And I'm glad to hear that you came from Oakland or Compton, over there on the West Coast. Either one of them is all right with me.
Okay. Oakland.
It's all right with the Raiders.
Yeah.
It used to be the Raiders. The Raiders. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, now, Cornell, with this executive clemency, if we were able to get that authority to the mayor, I take it that you would be in favor of that.
Oh, yes. Well, executive clemency would have to come. I don't know what happened here on this thing. This thing popped out for some reason. Can you hear me, Ben?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you, Cornell. Go ahead. Well, we may have lost them totally. So, Mr. Brown, you want to talk about that, transferring the executive clemency to the mayor? Would that be a good thing?
It'd be a great thing. I was serving a life sentence, and the only way I could get out was an executive clemency. And I was fortunate enough to receive an executive clemency from President Gerald Ford. And I had a life bid, and a lot of guys in Lawton was in a situation like that. And the mayor didn't have the authority, and I had to get to the White House. And they told me the only way I could get out was to get to the White House. I grew up in D.C., never heard of the White House. Ain't know where it was. And if it did pass, I thought it was Miss Jane's house around the corner. You know what I mean? So executive clemency is one of the few remedies for men and women in D.C. government to come out. And if you're in the state, the governor can grant you that authority. But we need the mayor to have that authority. And Myron Burr suggested it back in '94 that we get executive clemency into the office of the mayor so he can, or she can grant executive clemency to those deserving men and women who serve more than enough and should be out. And we know that deck is stacked. All this juggy boogie about the courts and what's family, the courts is just an extension of society and the same racism and discrimination you find inside. And I took 5 years before I got my clemency. They turned me down 4 times. And they had to investigate you from the day you went to elementary school and all this kind of stuff. And the same people investigating you are the same prosecutors from the Justice Department who will sentence you to prison. And they recommending that you don't. So they turn you down 4 times automatically. The first 4 times you turned down. So I was able to get it, and luckily, and it should be a lot more available to other men and women, man, not just to those who they feel able to give it to. And we need executive clemency in the office of the mayor's office.
Okay, now if we have executive clemency and that authority is given to the mayor, do you think the DC Attorney General and or the DC Council ought to have a role? So should the recommendation for clemency be approved by the DC Council, or should this authority rest solely with the mayor?
The authority should surely be with the mayor, and the mayor staff would do their due diligence and do the research and check out, etc., to make sure there's certain things that's made. But when you bring another outside of the Attorney General and the City Council, they can pass the law. He can give his position on it. The City Council can give their blessing in passing the law, get it supported to the mayor, and the mayor should set up a team, an office of executive clemency, and they do the due diligence and the necessary research to make sure that everything is okay with this. Yeah. But that's the mayoral decision.
Okay, so it should be a mayoral decision. The mayor makes the ultimate decision, but there should probably be a process where the council and the attorney general can at least make a recommendation to the mayor, but the mayor makes the ultimate decision.
I agree with you, Vincent. That's what we saying the same thing. I'm saying a committee or commission, whatever you call it, that make whatever recommendation to the mayor. Ensure the city council, even the community representative, participate in the recommendation to the mayor, and it's the mayor's final call.
Okay. Now, I don't know if Mr. Jones is back, but now we're going to move on. What are your thoughts about the reestablishing the D.C. Board of Parole? Right now, all paroles and revocation decisions comes from the United States Parole Commission. But in particular, if we become a state, do we need to reestablish the D.C. Board of Parole?
I think we need to establish that before we even become a state, or as soon as we can get it in. Because you're talking about people's lives. And they've been talking about bringing the D.C. Board of Parole back. Again, I go back to Aaron Burr in '94. He appointed 2 returning citizens or ex-offenders on the D.C. Board of Parole. He was ahead of the game back there 25 years ago. And we need to have our own parole board for them deserving folk who've earned their way out, man. And we know that, again, the deck is stacked and that discrimination, all that kind of stuff. We need our own D.C. Board of Parole, and we need a returning citizen on the Board of Parole, just like the state of Virginia just appointed Kimber Smith to their Board of Parole. She was locked up in a drug conviction. They did about 10 years and got a presidential pardon from Clinton. Now they appointed her to the Virginia State Board of Parole. And she's catching hell for folks saying she did this or she sold out or she's trying to let too many people out. And those right-wing folk who are ultra-conservative are giving her stuff. So we need our own D.C. Board of Parole to control the release and rehabilitation and transition for those men and women coming out back into society.
Okay. Now, we're going to hit a few more topics as we come to the closing of Facebook Live on the subject matter. But Mr. Brown, there have been a lot of folks that believe that we need to have transitional housing for returning citizens that provides them an opportunity to assimilate back into the community. What are your thoughts on transitional housing for returning citizens?
We need transitional housing desperately. We don't have a halfway house in D.C. for men. So when those men are going to halfway house, you've been gone 20, 30 years. Most men, or a lot of times, your family structure has been destroyed. Your mother, father died, the sister, brother, they moved away, or they're not doing well enough to bring you in. So these men that for 20, 30 years come out and there's nowhere to go, there's no housing. When they get into some housing, if they're able to get it, it's substandard. There's a lot of stuff going on with the situation. So housing is just as key to finding a job. We need a place to stay before you can find a job, or vice versa. But I would suggest you need a place to stay. And with the housing market in Washington, D.C., it's unbelievable. You and I talked, Vincent, we suggested something about doing a transition house. And we talking about doing a transition house. You call it the Marine-Barry House. We need a Marine-Barry transitional house for those men and women who are coming out of the institution. And Vince is on board with this. We talked about it. And if we do a Marine-Barry house, because Marine did a little time in the institution, he had to make a transition when he came out. And he transitioned from there back to the mayor's office. So we're talking about transitioning from the institution to a house, a legitimate house, man. And there's some things that we can do to create housing, and not only create housing, but create jobs while creating the housing. But we'll talk about that a little later, Council.
Okay. Well, there's also been discussions about our returning citizens receiving emergency housing vouchers, also just getting a bus ticket so they can get back to the district, and a little bit of money in their pocket. I mean, a $500 stipend so they can get back to Washington, D.C., have emergency housing, and a little bit of money in their pocket so they can begin to rebuild their lives. Can I get your thoughts on those?
So it's amazing that we got over 60 to 70,000 people with criminal records walking streets of Washington, D.C. And housing is such a critical issue. And I think they got less than 10 vouchers, maybe 20 vouchers. And that takes months before the vouchers process and that person is placed into a house or a place to stay. So we need more emergency vouchers. We need to make sure that the city government make resources. They put disabled, homeless, domestic violence people into hotels. We need to do the same thing. You just come out of a 6x8 cell, man. You ain't got no space, no room, and no movement, or nothing. All your thoughts have been suppressed. You need comfortable housing, man, or just housing, as opposed to going to the street. Telling most guys come out now, you got to go to the shelter. You did 25 years in prison, and they come out and tell you got to go to a shelter, even though your mother or somebody may have a house, because somebody in the house have a criminal record. You can't go in there. So these kind of restrictions or collateral consequences need to be looked at in addition to the housing. Because even if you find housing, depending on where it is, they might not want you in it because of your criminal record. You know what I mean? So finding a house, one piece of it. Go ahead.
Okay, now, Mr. Brown, you raised an interesting point. You mean to tell me after you have served your time and paid your debt, and you're coming back home, and someone that may be living in the home had a criminal record, but they've already paid their debt to society, that returning citizen cannot go to that home? Is that what you're saying?
He cannot go to that home. If he's on supervision, parole, or probation, or parole or supervision, he come out, and if somebody in the house has a criminal record, it could be off of parole, could have happened years ago, it doesn't matter. You cannot go and live in that house. You have to go to a shelter, even though you have a house to return to. This is some of these, again, these millions of collateral consequences that prevent, preclude, and restrict men and women from getting out. And this is just one of them. And if you want to go to the house, you got to make an appointment to go see his mother at her house that he grew up in.
Wow. Okay, well, in our closing moments, let's talk about how do returning citizens become gainfully employed. Now, in 2015, before I left the council, I introduced a bill, Bill 21-0463. It's entitled District of Columbia Incarceration to Incorporation Entrepreneurship Program Act of 2015. And at the time, the only council member I could get to sign on to this bill was Council Member Yvette Alexander. But through our hard work, we were able to get this bill passed unanimously. And what this bill called for is that a returning citizen would have the opportunity to take business classes at the University of the District of Columbia. This program would provide that returning citizen with an attorney and an accountant, provide an opportunity to create a business plan, and while attending classes at the University of the District of Columbia, come up with a sound business plan, and then make contact with the DC Department of Small and Local Business Development to get access to a contract. And at the time of the contract, set aside contracts were about $250,000, and then allow that returning citizen to start a business. Now, this was a $10 million bill out of a $16 billion government, and it passed unanimously. And by it passing unanimously, that means that the council passed the bill, the mayor signed the bill went to Congress, Congress approved the bill, the President of the United States signed the bill. However, the DC government never funded the bill. And the whole idea was to provide an opportunity for returning citizens to be gainfully employed, to have a contract, to hire folks. And my classic example is that if it was me, I would always want to have the toilet paper contract. I would find someone in the United States or wherever that creates the toilet paper, that packages the toilet paper up, and then you send it to my warehouse in the District of Columbia, and then my job would be to distribute that toilet paper. If it was to the school system, It would be, you have to be able to distribute to the 149 school facilities or to the government agencies. And that would be an opportunity for one to sharpen their skills, to do something legally and get involved in operating a business and hiring DC residents. But the council, after I left, we got the bill passed in 2016. The council, after I left, they never took this matter up again. So it died because of lack of funding, not because it wasn't approved, but because of lack of funding. But do you think a program like that, Mr. Brown, would work today, providing our returning citizens with an opportunity to be entrepreneurs and to have district government contracts to employ DC residents? What are your thoughts on that bill?
I agree with you 100%. And when you submitted the bill, I liked it, I supported it, and we wanted that to push because we need entrepreneurship and self-employment. A large percentage of small businesses in America are owned or operated by people with criminal records. Why? Because you're discriminated against. A lot of times you can't get a job, so these men and women go out and find it. You said the city that couldn't find the money for it. There is money for it, Vince. If I can suggest that all of the men and women in the federal system, their mothers, wives, sisters pay money. The phone contract in the Bureau of Prisons is $1.4 billion a year is what they make a year. And they give a commission, or what they call it, a kickback, to each individual prison to allow them to run the phone system. That kickback goes to the wardens, the Warden Association, the junior wardens, and all this kind of stuff. So the money that we spend should be sent back to DC from DC code prisoners to fund this kind of entrepreneur, employment, economic development initiative. At the same time, we need to make sure that all the monies, like that is deposited in the Bureau of Prisons by prisoners from DC, that money going to a black or minority bank, so that money can go to your entrepreneurship program where guys can get a small loan, a mini loan, micro loan. Because that old jiggy boogie about you get $500 when you get released. Man, I've been dealing with the prison system for over 50 years. I don't know nobody who ever got $500 when they got out of prison. And I don't care how much time he did. Guys did 46 years in $15. So that money that we need to fund your bill should come from the money that the men and women's families spend in the federal Bureau of Prisons, since they're getting their interest from all the money that we spend plus the money. So we're not getting that. Again, that goes back to statehood, so we can control our own.
Well, Mr. Brown, in this case, once again, DC government is a $16 billion government, and the city had the money. It was just the will of the council members. No one picked up the mantle. No one became the champion for this bill and pushed to get it funded, pushed to get the 7 votes to get this bill funded. It passed unanimously, so it wasn't a question of it not being legal. It was a question of the will of the council to put in the budget the $10 million to fund this bill. Now, that's one of the reasons why I'm running for office now, because what I'm seeing is that it's not about DC residents. And a classic example is this universal paid leave bill that became effective this year on July 1. Now, this is a bill where this DC council put a $250 million tax on the DC business community. And what they chose to do by law with this $250 million is to spend $160 million to provide paid leave benefits to non-DC residents. Yes, that's right, non-DC residents. 322,000 non-DC residents, primarily living in Maryland and Virginia, that come and work in our city every day, make the money in our city, and take their money back to Maryland and Virginia, which we cannot tax, and we have the audacity to provide them paid leave benefits. And these benefits are as follows. You get 8 weeks to bond with a newborn child, paid. You get 6 weeks to take care of a sick family member, paid by DC business to non-residents. And then finally, you get 2 weeks to take care of a personal situation. So COVID-19 crystallized all these issues. So these Maryland and Virginia residents that work in DC that find themselves impacted by COVID-19, DC taxpayer dollars are paying them to quarantine for 2 weeks in their homes in Maryland and Virginia, but we exclude 94,000 DC tax-paying residents who are working in Maryland or Virginia, but their dollars are taxed in DC. They come back home and sleep in their beds in DC, but they are excluded from these benefits. Now that doesn't sound right. That $160 million, we could use that to fund not only the incarceration to incorporation program, we can use that $160 million to provide our young people with laptops and access to the internet so they can engage in distance learning. We can use that $160 million to pay for our high school graduates to have free tuition at the University of the District of Columbia. Also, we can utilize that $160 million to provide mobile bus showers for the homeless while we provide them personal hygiene products. And we register them and find out what's going on. In everything that I've outlined, the cost is less than $160 million. So what's going on with our DC City Council enacting these type of bills, however, are not taking care of DC residents first? Now I know I'm on my soapbox now, but Mr. Brown, would you like to comment?
Do your thing, man. I enjoy listening, and you're right. And we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about improving the situation for making things better for us. We know that we've been behind the 8 ball and been kicked off the deck. And if we don't do things to help ourselves and to help those folk who are working to make things better for us, then we will continue to be in this situation. So I applaud you. I respect what you're doing. I support you. And we need more guys on the council, or people like you on the council, to make sure that the little guy or those folk, man, who have the least and the less are not forgotten. And that's what I take my hat off to. And if my hair was growing, I'd start it for you, man. But I ain't got.
Well, that's all right, Mr. Brown. And as you know, we're talking about men and women. I know when you say men, but we're talking about men and women. And we want to take care of our men and women, our DC residents first. It's just like being on an airplane. What do they say? If the oxygen goes out, put your mask on first so you can help the other person. And in DC, we got to make sure that our elected officials understand that DC residents need to put their masks on first before we seek to help others. There's nothing wrong with helping others, but we can't help others to our own detriment. And, at one point, there was a proposal to spend $152 million to give everyone in DC a Metro card. No means test, didn't matter what your household income, just spend $152 million. Well, I'm saying let's spend that $152 million to make sure that we're educating our young people, to make sure that we have affordable housing, to make sure that we're providing mental health services. That's what that $152 million can do. And if you could take that $152 million they were willing to spend on that initiative, along with the $160 million we're spending on non-DC residents, well, what is that? That's about $312 million. Do you know what we can do with $312 million for the residents of the District of Columbia? We can close that digital divide. We can provide that affordable housing. We can make sure that our children have the laptops and access to the internet. And in addition to that, we can make sure that everyone has personal protective equipment because of COVID-19. So, Mr. Brown, I'm going to continue to working with you, continue to working with Mr. Jones, continue to be the Paul Revere of this era, to sound the alarm. DC residents first. In the words of Calvin Rolark, the late, great Calvin Rolark, founder of the Washington Informer, ain't nobody going to help us but us. And if it's meant to be, it's up to me. And God bless the child who has his own. And all we have to do is, the stuff we learned in schools. I mean, well, I know they're disappointed that I was listening when they talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts with shelter, clothing, food, transportation before you can move to the next level. And in addition to that, we need to ensure that our children can read independently upon entering the 4th grade, that our children can add, subtract, multiply, and divide upon entering the 4th grade. Because if they can't do that, the United States Department of Education says more likely than not, that child will make contact with the criminal justice system. And we do not want that to happen. So let's make sure that our children can make the transition from elementary school to middle school so they can continue on with their educational development. The way it's going now, if our children can't make that transition, then the streets begin to call them. They begin to find and move to other bad things that are happening. And we don't want that to happen for the future, our future generations, for our future offsprings. So, Mr. Roach Brown, I want to give you the last words, because you got me all excited. You got me talking about issues that are near and dear to my heart. I am an ABC student. I have 7 sisters and 2 brothers. I'm the first one in my family to get the chance to go to college. And it all started with a program when I was 14, when 2 teachers came to me and said, you can help your Black race. We need you to be an ABC student, a better chance, operated out of Boston, Massachusetts. But if you accept this, it's like if you accept this assignment, then you're going to have to leave Oakland, California. We're sending you to Colorado Springs, Colorado. You're 14 years old, but we believe that you can do it. Help your race and do this. And, I was a pioneer, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And, the rest is history, providing our people opportunities. And with that, I was able to go on and become an attorney, certified public accountant, have degrees in law, business, taxation, and communications. But it all started because of a Better Chance program for a young kid at 14 years old, willing to take the assignment. And, it's sort of like watch Mission Impossible. You take this assignment and the assignment will burn up in 10 seconds, but that's your assignment, that's your mission, and you move on. So, Mr. Brown, you have the last word. Go ahead and talk to the viewing audience and just tell them to get on board with our DC incarcerated population and our returning citizens. Mr. Brown.
Most of the issues that are pertaining to the incarcerated, most people know them. 70% of all Black males in America have a criminal record, have been arrested or stopped by the police, or had some contact with the criminal justice system. And we know that it's discriminatory, it's racist, and all that kind of stuff. The main thing I want to talk about right now, being closing, is the coronavirus is devastating and killing men, women, and our youth. And the youth detention facilities all over the country are being flooded with infection cases of coronavirus, and too many kids are dying. So we have to get together, people, because they can't holler or scream the way we can out here. And if you was inside, you want somebody to do it for you. So please mobilize, energize, and get together on this coronavirus. We need to bring more pressure on the politicians to release our people and to vote. We got the largest voting bloc in the country as returning citizens, locally and nationally. If we organize, mobilize, and strategize, we can play a part. So if you're in the institution, you can't vote, get your mother, sister, brother, neighbor, grandma, grandpappy, I don't care who, grandkitten, get them to vote on your behalf to make sure that you participate in the vote and support our man Vince, because we need folks like him on the board. And again, coronavirus, we got to fight it, people, because they're killing our people. They locked up. They can't breathe either. Them T-shirts about I can't breathe. There's a new shirt coming out called We Can't Breathe Either. It's about the men and women inside who are dying. We need to help them, folks. They're our people. Thank you, Vince, for the opportunity.
Well, Mr. Roach Brown and Mr. Carnell Jones, we greatly appreciate you coming on to Facebook Live with Vincent Orange tonight to talk about a very, very important issue. We want to make sure that we vote. A voteless people is a hopeless people. And that is what the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated always indicates across this land. We must get out and vote. So everyone, come out and vote. No matter who you're voting for, go ahead and vote. A lot of people have given up their blood, sweat, and tears so we can have this opportunity to vote. And, all politics are local in the District of Columbia. make sure you're voting for someone that's in your best interest. I believe I'm in your best interest. And if you believe that as well, vote Vincent Orange, number 2 on the ballot. And you can go to my website, vincentorange2020.com, and see the things that we've been able to accomplish together over the years, such as the $15 per hour minimum wage, 5 days of sick leave pay for wage tip workers, the wage theft laws to make sure that people are not stealing folks' dollars, making sure that we have laws on the book to prevent discrimination against transgenders and pregnant women in the workplace, making sure I had to pass legislation to ensure that our children receive their books and core subjects by the second week of school. And that's unfortunate that we had to fight that fight, but we won that battle. And now we're going to fight the battle to ensure that our children have laptops and access to the internet so they can engage in distance learning. And also, we just want to make sure that we're taking care of DC residents first. I love the District of Columbia, raised my family here in the District of Columbia. We now have a granddaughter. And so we have a stake in the outcome. We are a $16 billion government, and we need to act like we have $16 billion, that we manage those dollars well, and that we take care of the citizens and residents of the District of Columbia. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for tuning in tonight. I'm going to sign off now, but may God bless the District of Columbia, and may God bless you as well. Thank you, and have a very enjoyable evening and a beautiful weekend. Thank you so much, and God bless. Thank you.
Put your hands together and receive Council Member Vincent Orange.
"20 years ago, 1 million men came to Washington, D.C. to atone. Through our atonement, we agreed to refrain from crime, drug addiction, and family abuse, while accepting responsibilities for ourselves, our families, and our actions. Today, we are here in the nation's capital again, with atonement as our foundation. We come to embark upon justice or else. Justice or else. And justice is tied to truth. And the truth shall set us free. I am Vincent Orange, a resident and citizen of Washington, D.C., and an at-large member of the Council of the District of Columbia. Today, I have a truth to share about the United States of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. The truth I share is supported by the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and the one man, one woman, one vote principle which our democracy is built on. Today, we speak truth to power. The truth is, nearly 700,000 citizens of the United States of America and residents of the District of Columbia have no voting representation in the United States Congress. We have no voting representation in the House of Representatives. We have no voting representation in the United States Senate. What we do have is taxation without representation. Collectively, the nearly 700,000 district residents pay more than $3 billion in federal taxes each year. 200,000 brave district resident men and women have served in the United States Armed Forces, fighting, dying. In fact, 2,000 of them dying for our beloved country, yet we have no representation in Congress. God bless the child who has its own. The citizens of the District of Columbia must have its own voting member in the House of Representatives and its 2 voting members in the United States Senate. Today, I stand before you under the umbrella of justice or else and demand for the 700,000 District of Columbia residents and citizens of the United States of America, statehood or else. D.C. statehood now. The District of Columbia, the 51st state of the United States of America, has a population larger than the states of Vermont and Wyoming. Moreover, we have an economy larger than the states of Alaska, Delaware, Hawaii, Idaho, Maine, Mississippi, Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. District residents generate $7 billion in local tax revenue. DC's annual budget is nearly $13 billion. We also possess nearly $2 billion in our rainy day fund. Unlike the 50 states of America, the District of Columbia has to get permission from Congress to spend our own money. That is not right. We demand the right to govern ourselves, our money, and our destiny like the other 50 states. Now today, how many of you have traveled from another state to get here? Do you know if you decide to live here and become a resident of the District of Columbia, you lose voting representation in Congress simply because you live in the District of Columbia in the United States, between the states of Maryland and Virginia. You lose voting representation in Congress and immediately become subject to taxation without representation. Do you know the first African-American Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder Jr., a DC resident, cannot run for a position in the House of Representatives or the United States Senate simply because he resides in the District of Columbia. On a personal note, I moved from Oakland, California to the District of Columbia in 1980, and I have lost and have been without a voting representative and 2 voting senators ever since, simply because I occupy this soil, this land, and I am a resident citizen located here in the District of Columbia in the United States of America. My children, like the other children of the District of Columbia, have been robbed of an opportunity to become a voting member of the United States House of Representatives or a voting member of the United States Senate because they are resident citizens of the District of Columbia. So today, I call upon you to be one of the 1 million signatures presented to the President of the United States, to the 535 members of Congress, to the 2016 Democratic National Convention, and the 2016 Republican National Convention demanding statehood or else. Statehood or else. Sign the petition today with the volunteers in red shirts, or go to the website change.org and sign the DC petition. The petition states, we, the undersigned citizens of the United States of America, hereby sign this petition urging the President of the United States and the members of Congress to support statehood and full representation for the 658,893 residents of the District of Columbia who collectively pay more than $3 billion in federal taxes each year, and where 200,000 brave district resident men and women have served in the United States Armed Forces defending, fighting, and 2,000 of them dying for our beloved country, yet have no voting representation in Congress. We believe this to be a true denial of democracy to the residents of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and the citizens of the United States of America. Statehood or else. Statehood or else. Under the umbrella of justice or else. God bless D.C. statehood. Justice or else.
This is Big Tony of the legendary Trouble Funk. In this upcoming election, we need to speak truth to power. We need a steady hand to guide us through this rough ride called COVID-19. We need to educate our kids and keep them safe. Stop the killings by adding jobs and opportunities. I'm Big Tony, and I urge you to vote Vincent Orange for City Council at large. He gets it done.
I'm Vincent Orange, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Vincent Orange 2020. Paul Wesley Orange, Treasurer.